Welcome. And today we are talking about Parshat Vayetze. Parshat Vayetze is an interesting one because it involves Jacob's dream, ladder, things of that sort. And I want to say as a kind of introduction, I know we're all in different time zones and different parts of, different parts of the world, but at least where I am on the East Coast, we just set back our clocks and it's, I'm looking outside, it's 2:00. It practically feels like it's evening already, which is quite sad and dispiriting for me. Also, this past weekend, we just welcomed the Hebrew month of Kislev, which is the month of Hanukkah. So all of these are different markers of the descent into winter and into a greater and earlier darkness. And I wanted to sort of look at that as a kind of way into this week's Parsha, which also takes place, or at least the opening scene takes place as darkness descends. And so I want to think about how we ought to kind of confront darkness and how Jacob does so in this week's Parsha in interesting ways. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. All right, so I wanted to start by looking not at the Sfat Emet, but at looking at some verses from this week's Parsha, and then also looking at some of Rashi's commentaries that the Sfat Emet will try to make sense of. So this Parsha, Vayetze, begins, Vayetze Yaakov mi Be'er Sheva, Vayelech Harana, Vayifga b'makom, Vayalen sham, Kiva hashemesh. Vayikach me'avnei hamakom, Vayase mirashotav, Vayishkav b'makom hahu. Vayachalom v'hinei sulam mutzav arza, V'rosho magia hashamayma, V'hinei malachei Elohim olim v'yordim bo. Jacob left Be'er Sheva and he set out for Haran. He came upon, and the Hebrew word here is Vayifga, a certain place, Vayifga b'makom, and stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. In Hebrew, Kiva hashemesh. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. He had a dream. A stairway or ladder was set on the ground, and its top reached to the sky, and angels of God were going up and down it. Right, so here we have the scene. Yaakov leaves his home. He's leaving with great fear, right? He's just stolen the blessing from his brother, who now is out to kill him. And so off he goes to save himself, basically. And he leaves, he's on this journey. He seems to be in the wilderness alone. And then the sun is setting and he decides to lie down. And then interesting things happen. Brief note, since the sun is setting so early, I want to say I was thinking about this verse just yesterday. I was walking across Central Park and found myself lost. I do not have a very good sense of direction. And all I could think of was Kiva hashemesh, like the sun is going down and I don't know where I am and there's nobody around, which is a little bit freaky. And I was, hoping that there'd be some, grand ladder to greet me, but alas, there was none. I did find my way home, but it did take me an hour and a half to cross the park. In any case, the feeling of anxiety as the sun is setting, particularly if one is in a wide open space, right, or one that feels unfamiliar, right, it can really yield a tremendous amount of fear, of worry, etc. And so I sort of imagine that this is where Yaakov is at, and he decides, I'm going to just stay put. And then he has this dream. But the focus of our sort of inquiry today is actually just in the kind of the setup for this moment, which is the second verse, Vayifga b'makom, right, where he comes to a place And then he stops there. Vayifga b'makom. And the reason why that's remotely interesting, well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, this might sound a little bit familiar to those of you who've been along for the ride. In Parshat Vayera, there was also a very famous and unspecified makom, or place. That place was the place of Har HaMoriah, right, Mount Moriah, where the Akedat Yitzchak, the trial for the binding of Isaac, took place. And in that portion, the Sfat Emet spoke about the specific use, I guess, of the unspecified term makom as a way of signaling God, because makom, or place, capital P, the place, is one of God's many names in the Bible. And so there in Parshat Vayera, he commented that when Avraham saw the place, it says, Vayar et ha-makom merachok. Avraham saw the place, or maybe saw God from a distance. And we had a lot to say then about what it means maybe to see God at a distance, or what it meant for Avraham to see God at a distance in that time. But I remind you of that because here we also encounter a makom that is also unspecified, and perhaps not so surprisingly then becomes identified with that last makom that we met, that same Har HaMoriah. So if you look at this Rashi here on the words Vayifga b'makom, he says, Lo hiskir hakatuv be'eze makom. Right? The text does not say which place, ela b'makom, but in the place. Hanizkar b'makom acher hu Har HaMoriah. So Rashi, the Midrash, says that this is the makom that we heard about before, Har HaMoriah, shne'emar bo vayaret hamakom merachok. Okay, so this is point number one, is where does Yaakov arrive, right? He came upon a place. Where does he come? He comes to none other than the place of his ancestors, right? Recall that Yitzchak is his father, right? So he leaves his home, right? And the first place that he comes to is this place of deep significance to his family, to the sort of intergenerational trauma, maybe, right? The first place that he goes is the place that his father had his own most transformative experience. It will also become a place of great significance for the future Jewish people, in that it will become the place of the temple. So it seems significant, right, to imagine that the first stopping point on the new journey in this next chapter of Jacob's life is specifically at Har HaMoriah. Now, here's one problem or something to consider. I'm not a maven of ancient biblical geography, but from what I understand, Har HaMoriah is quite a distance from Beersheba. So much so that in the story of Avraham, right, it takes 3 days to get there. But here it seems like this is his very first stop. So in this kind of, space of imagination, one might ask, how did he get there? How did he get there so fast? Okay. And the other sort of literary, point of interest here is this word vayifga, which was translated as he came upon. And as you can see in the next Rashi down, which is here, okay, vayifga, kimo ufaga b'yiricho ufaga b'dabeshet v'rabotenu pirshu lashon tefillah. So based on other verses in the Tanakh, which we don't need to go into, there is a claim made here that what does vayifga mean? It actually means he prayed. Kamo ve'al tifga bi, v'lamadnu shetiken tfilat arvit. So all of a sudden, we've gone from like the sun went down and Jacob lied down and he had a dream to Jacob went to Har HaMoriah. And when he did so, he prayed, he created, not just prayed, he created Tfilat Arvit, which is the nighttime prayer. And so the Rashi continues, well, if that's the case, why didn't the text just say, and he prayed, which in Hebrew is vayit palel? Why does it say vayifka? And now we get an even weirder aspect. Lilamdecha shekaftsa lo haaretz, to teach you that the ground jumped before him. Kemoshe mefarash beperek gid hanashe. That's not relevant for us, right? Okay, so there are three different points that Rashi makes that I want to bring to the fore. They are all rather odd. Just saying that. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Okay. So they're all a little weird. And today we get to sort of enter into the realm of kind of magic. So here are the things that are interesting to Rashi. Number one, the place that Yaakov goes is the place Hamakom Har HaMoriah. Number two, the way that he gets there. Remember, the question was, how did he get there? That was really fast. Well, turns out there was a like space-time continuum collapse, and lo and behold, the mountain jumped to Muhammad, something like that, right? The mountain jumped to Jacob. I'm sorry if that was like a in politic thing to say. It was just the idiom jumped into my mind. Right. So the mountain jumped to Jacob. That's how he got there so fast. The mountain came to him. Okay. And third, what did he do when he got to this mountain? Vayifka, turns out he created the prayer of Arvit or Ma'ariv or evening prayer, however you want to call it. Okay. So three elements are introduced into this otherwise pretty mundane text about, Jacob just wandering around and lying down for his first night away from his family. Okay, so those are the 3 points. Now, what the Sfat Emet is interested in this week is what is the relationship between these three things? Right? Recognize, right? These are all really insertions into the text, which isn't so unusual. The commentators do that all the time, but it's not at all obvious from the text that the place that he's in is Har HaMoriah. It really doesn't say anything about mountains or the history of the place or the name of the place, or right? There's no indication aside from that word makom. So what kind of conceptually is going on for why place Jacob there, right? And what is the business of jumping mountains, right? Like why do that? Again, kind of conceptually, if you can call sort of this kind of magical thinking a concept, right? Conceptually, what's at stake? What do you get by introducing such wild, whimsical images? And finally, what's up with Jacob and prayer? What does it mean that he established the prayer, and why did he establish the prayer right then and there? And in what sense did he establish the prayer? All of these are the questions that the Sfat Emet sees in just these Rashis, and becomes the kind of occasion for his own thinking about prayer, mountains, magic, all of that. Okay, so I'm going to turn my screen share back on and we will look at this Sfat Emet. Okay, so this is from the year 1873. And he says, Birashi, where we just were, Vayifka, which we just read, Tiken Tfilat Arvit, V'lo Ketiv Vayitpalel, Lilamdecha Shekaftsa Lo Haaretz. Right? So on the verse, he came to a certain place and stopped there for the night, etc. Rashi says he came upon indicates that Jacob established the evening prayer, and the verse does not say, and he prayed to teach you also, I'm over here for those of you following, sorry, that the ground jumped or shrunk before him, right? There's lots of different ways that this moving mountain could go, right? It could like jump, or maybe that the distance between them shrunk, right? All kinds of creative ideas. Although there is another place that explicitly says that the mountain moved. So I'm inclined in that direction for our, thinking about it. I have no idea what really happened, but that's the image that I'm mostly working with. In any case, he says, "Ve'eino muvan ki lefi hazeh shetiken tfilat arvit ma inyan kfitzat haaretz lekan." Which is, it is not clear, according to this opinion, what the relationship is between establishing evening prayers and the jumping of the land. Okay, so I hope that the nature of the question itself is clear, or the unclarity is clear, right? That Rashi clearly brings these particular elements together: the establishment of evening prayer and the jumping of the mountain, and it's just not at all, discernible what those two have to do with each other. Okay, and that is what the Sfat Emet wants to explore. So he says, "Ach bivadai kefi ratzon ha'adam yachol leorer kedushat Hashem yitbarach b'chol makom." He says, it is for sure, bivadai, that according to the will of a person, can one arouse the holiness of God in any place, b'chol makom. Hence, v'zeh shekatuv Rashi ne'ekar har hamoria uva lekan. That was the other source I was mentioning before, right? Rashi also says another place, literally, that, or well, whatever, that the image should be that the mountain uprooted itself and came to Jacob. Perush, I'm over here, kiven shahaya Yaakov Avinu alav shalom ratzon gadol lavo lahar hamoria. Okay, so what he says here is, what does it mean that the mountain came to Jacob? It means that Jacob really, really wanted to come to the mountain, or Jacob really wanted to have this encounter. And I'll pause here for a moment to remind us the frame of Har HaMoriah, which the Sfat Emet does not explicitly say, but I think it's implicitly there. What does it mean that Jacob so badly wanted to go to Har HaMoriah? I think this is frankly open for question. Feel free to, put your thoughts in the chat, and we'll talk a little bit later about it. But why does he so badly want to be there? Right? There seems to be some deep need within him, right? Again, when he leaves his father, right, to essentially align with his father, or fuse with his father, or identify with his father, or something like that, right? A place of great significance to his father is the very first stopping point that he really, really badly, with ratzon gadol, right? Tremendous will, he wanted to go there. And the result suggests the Sfat Emet, and we'll see this in a moment inside, but he says that this is, and one has to decide if he means this, figuratively or literally, but that our capacity to move mountains, and the way that we use that idiomatically in English, right, is all based on our will. If we really, really, really want something, if we really, 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 really work towards it, let's say, it can come, even if it's something that seems so very much out of reach. He says, "Af ki makom hazeh haya meruchak meod." Even though this place was very, very far, kafatz har hamoria lekan. It came to him, right? It came to him. Now so let me just pause there for one moment. Okay, so the claim here is, about the relationship, or I'll say differently, the power of human will, human agency, right? Our capacity to move mountains through, and not only, and I'm using that phrase because I hope that it resonates with our own idiomatic expressions, but he's also very clear about, in particular, our capacity to kind of render God real, or to bring the Shekhinah, le'orer kedushat Hashem yitbarach b'chol makom, right? It is within the human capacity to awaken, arouse, le'orer, right? To awaken the divine in any place, right? So interestingly, though the imagery, right, is so very starkly about a mountain jumping and coming toward Jacob, right? There's an inversion here, right, that suggests that maybe you could say Jacob brought the mountain, right? So the agency is not on the part of the mountain jumping to Jacob, but that Jacob summoned the mountain, which is to say he summoned Hamakom, which is to say he summoned God, right? And I'll also just maybe suggest here that not only, right, does Har HaMoriah have all this historical familial valence for Yaakov, but one might also say, right, insofar as it was a place where God was manifest, even if at a distance, saying that he craved to bring about godliness, right, is also perhaps a statement about his own kind of distance from God, as he just did this really big thing called like deception. He really angered some people, namely his brother, his father, arguably, right? He stole a blessing that wasn't his, right? And now his brother is really, really, really mad. And so perhaps he leaves with maybe some guilt, probably a whole lot of fear, probably doesn't feel the presence of God in a very deep way. Maybe wonders whether God will accompany him, given these kind of traitorous acts that he's just done. And so he summons, right, as the night comes, and as he probably is in touch with his own, right, fears and anxieties, and it's all coming back in the dark, right, he desperately, right, wants to feel God, and he wants to feel close to God. And the suggestion is that that is something that human beings can do. God doesn't just show up, but we summon God to show up. And interestingly, I think, he being the Sfat Emet, now makes the leap, the connection rather, between, right, the jumping mountains and the prayer. Okay. And he says, V'zehu itzumo perush tfilat arvit. This, he says, is the essence of tfilat arvit. This, what's this? We're going to talk about it in a moment, right? But this, essentially, this capacity to summon God, and specifically this capacity to summon God in the dark, at a distance, right? That is essentially what prayer of the night is about. It's about summoning, bringing light, right? Making presence real at times where we might feel abandoned. This is the essence of nighttime prayer, he says. Ki bevadai be'et choshech ein makom ligalot ha'or. Right? Because the character of night, he says, right, is the time where it's not possible to really summon, to lihitgalot ha'or, to reveal the light, to see the light, except rak al yedei ritzon ha'adam, but for human intervention, essentially, right? That like the world outside isn't providing light. The only way to find light in the dark is for a human being to bring it. And he says, Rak al yedei ritzon ha'adam shelo b'hadraga al zeh mitarer he'ara shelo al pi derech hateva. I don't want to focus on this line, but essentially he's talking about the unnaturalness of this move. And in that, I'm using that word in its most literal way, right? It's counter to nature, right? Nature is dark at night, right? But we have to act lo al pi derech hateva, not in accordance with the way of nature, if we want to shift things, right? If we want to bring in light in a time where nature says it's dark time, it's something that we ourselves have to do and can do. And he says, Ki hakol talui b'ratzon ha'adam, because everything really does hinge on human will. I want to pause there and just make, I feel like there's an important kind of, I don't know, trigger warning or something to say here, that I think that it's important to recognize as at least I present these words of the Sfat Emet and give such power to the human being, and specifically a human being to bring themselves light. I also just want to recognize the limits of this model, and that, as you can probably imagine, there is an analog here, right, that is much more about one's kind of psychological well-being and what it means to live in the dark or live in the light. And the Sfat Emet does seem to make a pretty strong claim that we have the power to bring ourselves into the light, that when we encounter darkness, the response should be tfilat arvit, right, which is to say a prayer of the night that brings in some light. And the limit that I detect here, and the one that I just want to make sure to name, is I want to recognize that, as wonderful as this might be for some to imagine, right, it is also, as he will say, it's as hard as moving mountains. This is ultimately how things circle together, right? That yes, it's true, as he understands it, that a human being really can summon God, and a human being really can bring themselves light. But it is a hard thing to do, as hard as moving mountains. And when I say that I want to acknowledge the limits, it's because I really recognize, I've had some family members who really struggle with depression, and I just want to recognize that it's really not easy to bring oneself into the light just by power of will and agency, and because you really want it, right? And so I just want to acknowledge that, and also, though, really foreground the language of the Sfat Emet, which we'll see in a moment, right, that does recognize this difficulty and ultimately aligns tfilat arvit, the prayer of the night, with moving mountains because of its inherent difficulty. So I'm going to read some of that inside. He says, Ki hakol talui, I read that already. V'ktiv shalom lekarov v'lerachok. Perush she'ein davar ra yotze ma'Hashem yitbarach, im ken harichuk hu gam ken letova. I'm going to actually skip this part. I don't want to focus on it. It's actually a similar message to last week, frankly. So we'll leave it for now. It's this that I want to focus on. Ve'al yedei zeh haratzon. The translation is all there if you want it, but I just want to focus on these last lines here. Ve'al yedei zeh haratzon yachol le'orer gam b'makom harachok he'arat Hashem yitbarach kanal. And he says, on this account, again, through human ratzon, through human will, power, all of that, desire maybe, right? One can actually render a far away place close, right? This was the reference that he made a moment ago to Isaiah, Shalom rachok v'lakarov in Isaiah, which is, right, hello or peace for the far and the near, that which is far can be brought near, he says. I'm just going to read it inside one more time. Right? So in this way, a person can awaken even in a far away place. The word or is in there, light, right? That even in a far away place, one can actually draw out light, draw out godliness, right? V'zeh shekatuv, this is really this is the point about the difficulty. V'zeh shekatuv lelamdecha shekafza. And now returning to this image of the moving mountain, he says, again, what is the relationship between moving mountains and evening prayers? Sheyesh mizeh limud, l'chol ish Yisrael, to every person, we're going to say, sheyeda, she'ein lecha makom shelo yuchal lehargish he'ara pnimiyut al yedei yigi'ah shel emet. He highlights two aspects of the moving mountain. On the one hand, the difficulty, and on the other hand, right, the magic, right? So the difficulty of it means, this is the language of Yigi'ah Shelamet, you really, really, really have to work on this. It's not something that one can do with ease. And I would suggest that, excuse me, that the language of Tfilat Arvit, whether or not you have a specific practice of saying, right, the prayer that's in a prayer book of Tfilat Arvit, I think what he's suggesting is what, in order to actually do this thing called bringing light into darkness, right, or bringing the far close, it requires actually the routinization of daily practice, of yigi'ah, of really working at it every single day. That if you really do want to bring light into the dark, it requires a muscle to be really worked at, right? I would say day in and day out, or night in and night out, as the case may be. And so when it says that Yaakov was tiken tfilat arvit, the suggestion is, right, Yaakov established the nighttime as a time for a specific kind of prayer. And the specific kind of prayer that Yaakov is responsible for is the prayer of the night, the difficult prayer, the prayers that are said when things don't look so bright, when God doesn't feel so near. Though that is the prayer of the night. Jacob himself is a kind of character of the night, and next week we'll talk about that, but he will famously, right, encounter a mysterious man in the night, right, and he will wrestle till the break of dawn. He's a person who lives in these kind of liminal spaces and in anxiety-provoking spaces. He is a kind of unresolved character, right, someone whose name will change next week to Yisrael, but will also always be known as Yaakov, in contrast to other people whose names have changed and they are only known by their names. Like Avram is known as Avraham forevermore, or Sarai becomes Sarah and only that. Jacob's the only one of the forefathers or foremothers who are given a new name that doesn't entirely stick, which is to say that his transformations aren't complete, right? The Yisrael, the one who wrestles, will continue to wrestle and will continue to kind of toggle between identities. Again, we can talk more about that next time, but the idea that he is a character who sits, right, who sits in this kiva hashemesh, it's twilight. It's not just like the depths of darkness per se. It's actually, he sits in these transitional spaces and he tries really hard to get across, like to make it through the night, to make it to the other side of the Yabok next week, right? These are all, he's constantly, you know, in the shadows and trying to emerge. His name Yaakov, right? He's always pulling at the heel of something. And so the suggestion, again, now coming back to, I'm going to come back to those three elements, and hopefully we can tie this together a little bit. Let me stop the share so you can maybe see each other a little bit more. So to come back, we had three elements that emerged from this word vayifka, bamakom, excuse me, right? They are, the location is Har HaMoriah, or the location is another word for God. What does Jacob encounter? Jacob encounters God. Where does Jacob encounter that? At Har HaMoriah. But how does he get there? The mountain jumps. And why does the mountain jump? Or said differently, either by what means or what does he do at the mountain? And the answer is he prays. So what is the relationship between the place, the prayer, and the magic, essentially, right? And so to kind of summarize, right, human beings, Jacob, us, right, we might have deep cravings for things, people, God, right, that we actually desperately need in our lives, want in our lives, and feel missing in our lives, right? These are spaces of darkness that we find ourselves in often, perhaps daily/nightly, right? And how ought we to confront the night through a regular practice, right? Every single day practice, sometimes a boring practice, but a practice that summons willfully light and godliness. And how hard is that? Very hard. Very, very hard. So hard that it can feel like actually moving mountains. But there's one more sentence that I wanted to share with you, which is the last one, sorry, of the verses on our page. Okay, which is after this dream, we have the following statement: Vayikatz Yaakov mishnato. Yaakov awoke from his slumber. Vayomer, Achen yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh, ve'anochi lo yadati. Alas, surely the Lord is present in this place. Makom again, right? Achen yesh Hashem in this place, or the place, capital P, is in this place, lowercase p. Ve'anochi lo yadati, and I actually didn't know it. Vayira vayomer ma nora hamakom hazeh ein zeh ki im beit Elokim v'zeh shar hashamayim. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven. I love that line. And I love the surprise. I love the surprise. It's something that also emerges, by the way, from the word vayifga at the opening. It's not just that he came upon a place. Faga, pigua might be a word that unfortunately might be known to you, right? It has an element of coming upon without expectation. He surprisingly found himself in this place and was surprised to discover on the other side of this encounter what was there already. And so it seems to me that on the one hand, this kind of meditation on Tfilat Arvit and meditation on darkness and light and prayer and magic, right, is on the one hand, right, an invitation to a regular and kind of vigorous practice, yigi'ah, as the language, it's like rigorous and vigorous, right? It requires effort, but a daily practice that actually calls from within us, right? The power to summon things from without, the power to summon the light, the power to summon God, etc., right? And simultaneously recognizing the difficulty of that says you just might be really surprised on the other side. Anochi lo yadati, ma nora hamakom hazeh, right? I had no idea what was already there, or maybe I had no idea what was already inside of me and what power I had. And we might be able to say, ma nora hamakom hazeh, how awesome is this place, capital P, lowercase p, right? How awesome is this capacity to actually kind of render holiness real in the world? How awesome is it, right? Literally, as the lights go out, to be able to hold on or actually bring light into those spaces that feel so hard, so much filled with, fear or anxiety, etc. Manora hamakom hazeh. So I am going to stop there and open up for some questions or comments, and I'm going to take this off so I can see you. And that's that. So I hope that worked. Okay. So let's have some responses. Roberta Wall, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. I've been enjoying your teachings every week, so thank you so much. So when the Sfat Emet says, I don't have it right in front of me, but that human will can arouse the divine presence, I'm paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. What I'm hearing is that the Sfat Emet's concept of the divine, mm-hmm, is not a fixed concept, that it co-arises
Yes, well said.
with
Good word.
what humans bring to it. Well, that's exactly the Buddhist term. And it's so amazing because when I came to Judaism as a spiritual path from Buddhism, and my first question was always, well, wait a minute, is Judaism saying that there's this like fixed entity that controls everything, that's not affected by anything? Because that's the reputation of monotheism. And it seems like Chassidut is so far from that. And also Rashi, which is, so just could you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you for teaching me that term. I really like it, of co-arising.
Well, it's a dependent co-arising.
There you go. Even better. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, yeah. Okay.
So, yes, this Chassidut ought to be your kind of theological, spiritual home, I would imagine, if that resonates, because that idea, I don't claim to understand it from a Buddhist perspective, but certainly from a Hasidic perspective, I love the dependent co-arising is even more powerful, right? The way in which human beings and God are part of a reciprocal, synergistic kind of energy, give and take in the world is absolutely, absolutely essential, right? And with the emphasis being on reciprocal, or you said dependent, right? We are each dependent on the other, and the flow of Shefa, which sorry for this noise, it will disappear in a moment, but the flow of Shefa that we mentioned also last week is about God, the sort of godly energy flowing into the world, but it's only because we make space for it or unlock it. And so absolutely, here we have this very idea, right? And understand that what he's talking about here is prayer itself, right? The prayer itself is the moment of unlocking, right? Prayer isn't about, or certainly isn't exclusively about beseeching, right, a God out there, right? Prayer is the internal practice of summoning from within oneself the capacity to draw out or summon or bring near that which feels far. Very different picture of what prayer is, very different picture of what a relationship with, with God or holiness or spirit could be. So thanks so much for shifting the frame a little bit. I really, really appreciate that. Okay, we'll move on. Barb Truitt, I hope I said that right.
Yeah. Okay, this is another framework that I've been reading a lot about indigenous peoples, and frequently there are tales of out-of-body experiences where they can go into a trance, or if you'd say prayer, and travel to some place that they've never been before, or visit someone.
Ah, beautiful.
And is this that he traveled, not that the mountain came to him, but he went to the mountain.
Right. So I don't, I don't know about the direction of it, but I absolutely, I love loving all these connections. It's so great, right? But the idea, right? So I think that the Sfat Emet, sorry, I'll say it differently. You're right to kind of foreground the spatial pieces here, right? That on some level there is a claim, right? That not only can one change one's feelings, but one can actually find oneself located in a different space completely through, whatever those actions are, through that will, through the imagination, through whatever, techniques available to indigenous peoples as well. The idea that one could actually travel, we perhaps think about, time travel in totally sci-fi ways. And well, maybe that's still true, right? But there is a spiritual frame for time travel and space travel. And this is it. And I think that what you're pointing out is very much in keeping with it. Who's coming to who, the language of the Midrash is that the mountain came to Yaakov, but it's only because, right, Yaakov made it come. Right. And so in a sense, I suppose you could say that he traveled to the mountain, or he made the mountain travel to him. But thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, Arnold Block, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about why Mount Moriah has taken on this holiness place, like this place where he'd want to be, isn't it likely that Isaac would have told his sons that this is the place where my father tried to kill me?
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like a place where I'd want to be to find God, even though God was there and stopped it. There's so many other places that would have made more sense.
Okay, so interesting. And I don't know how many like psychologists or people psychologically inclined there on this call. I'm going to guess a lot of you, but I don't know. But some of you maybe have something to say here, because it's a great question, right? Like, why would he go to the place of his father's trauma? So on the one hand, right, one response is, well, it's Hamakom, and Hamakom is God. So regardless of sort of what happened there to his father, it becomes a place that is associated with godliness. Hamakom, the place, is this place, so much so, right, that it will become the place in the future, as I said before, of the temple. So when I say that I'm like calling upon the psychologists in the room here, is because I do think there's something very interesting going on here about feeling oneself pulled to the site of ancestral significance, even if it's traumatic, or maybe dafka, as we say, because it's traumatic. So I completely hear the pushback, and this is all speculation. So like, maybe you're absolutely right. It's the last place that Yaakov would want to be, which only makes it more interesting that the Midrash suggests that it's there, right? It didn't have to say that. He could have been in many other places. And yet the Midrash puts him there. And I think there are any number of reasons why, but I do think that from a psychological standpoint, and I'm not a psychologist, though I am the daughter of one, the idea of being drawn into the kind of foundational story that shaped your ancestors is something that feels resonant to me, at least, right? It's like why we go to why did, I don't know, I think on a very personal, individual level, I think it makes sense. And I also think collectively, it's why, Jews go to visit concentration camps too. It's like we don't only want to bear witness to the sites of our people that are affirming and celebratory, but also the ones that deeply shaped our kind of collective psyche in ways that, stamped us for all time in traumatic ways as well. Okay, that was heavy. Martha Gunsberg, go ahead.
Okay. I also was thinking about the Mount Moriah and why he was yearning for Mount Moriah. And until we were talking about it, I had too felt what a scoundrel he is and what a heel. But I think that also maybe he felt like he was being sacrificed, that it was his mother who wanted him to engage in this deception. And he did it sort of reluctantly. And here he is, bearing all these difficult consequences of being thrust out, and that he too, like, he might have felt some identification with his father of being sacrificed for something, some larger purpose.
That's really interesting. Never considered it. Right, it's hard sometimes to see the scoundrel as victim, but I think what you're saying is very interesting, right? To suggest that this is, and interestingly, it's not his father, it's his mother, right? It's Rivka who would be sacrificing, in a sense, her son for the sake of, right? So that the blessing goes through him. And what's sacrificed is his relationship with his father, his relationship with his brother, right? He is exiled for 2 decades. It's like a long time to break up a family, right? So that you can get the better blessing. It's such an interesting perspective to think that Rivka in a certain way sacrificed him.
But it wasn't Rivka. Was told, like last week, someone brought that out, that Rivka was told when she went to find out about the unusual pregnancy. And she was told that 2 nations will struggle and the younger one will, prevail over the older one, so that she could have been also following in for this larger
interesting,
perspective.
very interesting. Thank you. I'm just going to walk away with lots to think about. Thank you. Ilana Axel, go ahead.
Hi, so I'm not a psychologist, but a student of in other ways. I'm reminded of the fact that when this is happening, Isaac has already passed away, and I think Jacob is at a place of processing, and now Jacob is processing with a parent who he can't in this life process or discuss with, and it's sort of. I mean, not to belittle this great spiritual idea, but I mean, it makes me think of our generations, even our day, when our children think about, do I want to be, a dentist like my dad? Do I want to, what is my place in the family destiny? What is my place in the family history? He's such a young man, Jacob. And when we're in places of process, we will go to places that have past family traumas because we want to try and, I'm using the word process a lot, but we want to process that in order for it to inform our own lives going forward. And then the other thing that's part of this process is and to I think Martin's point and others, how is it that if this is a place of such trauma for Isaac, where he was almost killed, how is it that Isaac yet carries on the faith of his father? And I think that's one of the more interesting questions of the Akedah. And so Jacob would like to understand this better. And so where better to go but to experience this whole family history than, I think you pointed out, I had a chance to take a vacation with my daughters many years ago. They were young, and my husband and I chose to take them, of all places, to Poland. I mean, then we went to Israel, but afterwards. But so it's like why that's not like a fun thing to do, but it was a necessary thing to do. So I feel like it's more necessary in his development than it is desirable, perhaps. But he senses this new status placed upon him now, and now he has to fulfill. Oh, now I have to actually understand what this is. It's like he's going from the BA to the PhD very quickly.
No, that's fantastic. I keep saying that. Sorry, I just mean it. But I love the idea of kind of him visiting a site of essentially integration, of trying to figure out on the other side of his own. Right. I don't know if it's trauma. It sort of depends on, based on the conversation we were just having before. Right? Does he feel like he's been sacrificed? I don't know what his experience of this deception was. But he's certainly starting a new chapter, right? Leaving behind his family for what will become, right, decades. He doesn't know that just yet, but he knows that he has just done something that has created a tremendous rupture. And what do you do there? And sorry, I want to say something that you just reminded me of, actually. I mentioned before that vayifka, right, is a word of surprise, and that I didn't know that God was here, right, is certainly explicitly surprise. I wonder if part of Jacob's surprise wasn't so much about the place of, like, the location that God showed up, but that God showed up at all. That perhaps some of what he's carrying with him on the other side of this deception is, right, maybe God has abandoned me, right? Maybe I'm just a scoundrel and God's not going to show up anymore. Or I'm no longer on a godly path, or something like that. And I'm disoriented, and I don't really know if, like, my spiritual life is intact at all on account of all that has happened. And I think part of the surprise is, oh, wait, you're still here. Oh, you haven't abandoned me completely, or I still have the power to find you despite who I've become and what I've done. And I find that sort of interesting juxtaposed with what you just said, Ilana, because I could imagine that being somehow related, not the same, but related to the dynamic that you were imagining with Isaac, of where did his faith go post Akedah, or how did he retain faith post Akedah, and might he have been surprised also to discover that God was still in the picture somehow? Side note: God and Abraham would not communicate after that moment, so it's not clear that relationship remained, but Isaac still has, ironically, it's Isaac who has the relationship, and maybe Yaakov wants a little bit of that, like a little bit of learning how to live on the other side of drama and trauma,
and being tested, So, V'Elohim nisat Avraham, but, God doesn't only test Abraham.
Yeah.
God also is testing Isaac, and then up to the next generations.
Right.
We're all being tested by all the different things that our generations have themselves been tested, and they impact us so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I see some other hands. Mitchell, James, go ahead. James, sorry.
So I just wanted to shift this a little bit, but sort of using as a fulcrum point this wondering of, has God abandoned him, or what's his relationship to God? And I just wanted to offer sort of a personal experience where, for me, it's not even the question of has God abandoned me, but it was like simply getting comfortable with approaching the concept of God. And when I think about my early engagements with IJS and taking up a meditation practice, and so I really want to focus on the regular routine practice. And I was into it for a couple of years, and I'm not entirely sure why, which is a whole separate thing, but I stuck with it. And there was then an experience I had in the context of other IJS programming, where all of a sudden, the couple of years of meditation practice took on a very different valence, which wouldn't have happened if I hadn't put all that time in. And I wasn't entirely sure why I was putting the time in or where it might take me. And by the way, I don't want to overstate this. It took me to a shift. It did not take me to a moment of theophany. Exactly. But that's okay. I'm okay with shifts. But what it did do is it has created a model for, based on my own experience, as to if you put in the discipline and the time, there's kind of this open, for me, this open of where it may lead. I know I'm speaking kind of vaguely, but that's because of my sort of discomfort with this, but not discomfort, my, the newness and, wrestling myself with things. But I have found there's a lot to be said about the regular practice and fill in the blank. Meditation, prayer, hipo to doot, whatever you want to.
Right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely. First of all, I'm happy to hear it for you and your shift, but also that is, I think, very much part of this, right? That what Yigi'ah shel emet, those words at the very end of the Sfat Emet, right, which means like, truth. It translates right as like truthful exertion or exertion for truth, but there's a sense of the regularity of it and the challenge of commitment again and again and again and again. And that's why I think the tying of this to Tfilat Arvit, which, right, some people do have a nighttime practice where they like open a prayer book, but some people have just a nighttime practice of some other kind that, that might speak to these issues of, specific to evening time, nighttime, darkness, etc. So thank you. Okay, last comment from Anne Rickover, please.
I was thinking that perhaps Jacob learned from his father just the hard qualities of God. He wanted to kill my father, as someone else said. But the surprise here was learning the chesed aspect, that God was in this place and there's more to God than I knew. Just a little balancing out the concept of God.
That's really, really beautiful. And I just want to add that Jacob, we've talked on other weeks about the kind of character of Abraham as, right, one who knows God through love, and Isaac, who knows God through fear. And Jacob is this interesting character. On the one hand, truth or emet is associated with him, but he also is continuously presented as a kind of bridge character. When he's introduced, maybe not the first time, but he's known as Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. He's a simple person, or different interpretations, Yoshev Ohalim, which some interpret to mean he's a yeshiva bachar. He sits in the tent and he studies Torah all day. But there's this beautiful mystical tradition that he's someone who sits between tents, right? That he's not a Yoshev Ohel, but he's a Yoshev Ohalim. He sits in multiple tents, or he sits between tents, is this tradition, which is to say that he sits between Avraham and Yitzchak. He sits between Chesed and Gevura and Ahava and Yirah, and he is this person who, again, struggles. Right, that sitting isn't one of stasis, but one that continuously and dynamically tries to kind of weave together these different strands, these different ways of knowing God, these different ways of being in the world. And maybe again, that's why he's the character of the night or of the evening, right? Which is precisely the blending of day and night. He sits in those liminal spaces. Okay, we'll stop. It's 3:01. Thank you, everybody. I hope to see you next week.